Hey, I'm Timothy. I've put together cases where tourists' dream vacations turned into tragedies. We start in Florida, where a woman went out for a boat ride and never came back. Then, a tourist couple tries a Superman zipline for the first time, and it will also be their last. On the afternoon of June 11, 2014, emergency dispatch got a call from a boat off the Florida coast reporting a critically injured passenger. At first, it sounded like a common injury until they asked what happened. No crash, no fall, nothing on board to explain it. The caller could only say a female tourist had been hit by something he never saw. Dispatch initially treated it as a serious onboard accident. But when responders reached the dock, nothing about the scene matched what they expected. No clear cause, no obvious mechanism, just a critically injured passenger and unanswered questions. And I know that's what you're wondering. What actually happened out there? To understand that, we have to start with the victim. Her name was Denise Harper, a 58-year-old. Denise was a physical therapist from Canada. For years, she had stayed close to home while caring for her husband through a long illness. And based on the information I gathered, after her husband passed, this trip was one of the first times she had agreed to leave home again. So her younger brother arranged the vacation with a small charter with just a few people. Calm water, nothing extreme. The plan was simple. A quiet afternoon offshore. Something easy she could finally say yes to. Now, back to the case. Denise was still on the deck near the bow bench where she had been sitting. Nothing around her suggested a struggle. There weren't even signs that she had moved or tried to get up. But what puzzled the investigators was that her injuries didn't match a simple fall. Most of the damage was to her upper body and head, which led investigators to first consider whether someone else had been involved. They interviewed the crew, the other passengers, and the short window when it happened. But Denise had been alone at the front of the boat at that moment, and no one reported any kind of contact. Then, they noticed something that didn't fit the scene at all. The rail beside her had fresh scuff marks. The marks were deep, clear signs of a hard, direct impact. There was also residue on that section that didn't match anything on board. There was no loose equipment, no broken parts, nothing missing. At that point, they started considering a different possibility. Whatever hit her didn't come from the boat. Then, the boat's camera was reviewed, and it gave a clearer sequence. At around 2:14 p.m., Denise is seen sitting at the bow, facing the water. For several seconds, nothing unusual happens. The water is calm. At 2:14:18, there's a sudden disturbance beside the boat, just a quick burst under the surface. Less than a second later, something shoots upward. It clears the side of the boat and hits her directly in the upper body. The impact forces her backward into the bench frame. Within minutes, she is already down on the deck, not moving. The captain immediately turns the boat and calls for help as passengers rush forward. But by then, she is unresponsive. With the footage, the source of the impact became clear for everyone. A large spotted eagle ray had launched out of the water at speed, cleared the rail, and struck her before falling back into the ocean. The same animal was later found floating nearby, injured from the collision, confirming what had hit her. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as severe blunt force trauma with critical injuries to her head, neck, and chest. The timeline matched the footage, and the case was officially ruled an accident. No negligence was found. Denise's brother stayed behind to handle everything. It took several days to work through the process with local authorities before she could be brought back home to Canada. What was meant to be a simple trip ended with him going home alone. I keep thinking about how something that random can happen in a place that feels completely safe. But the next case stayed with me for a different reason, because this time, the danger didn't come out of nowhere. It came from someone already there. A quiet beachfront, a nearly empty resort, just enough staff to feel safe, but still isolated enough to feel like you had the place to yourself. That's what this resort in Palawan felt like. But in less than 24 hours, that same quiet became distance. The isolation that made it feel safe also meant no one was close enough to hear anything or step in when it mattered. On September 8, 2017, a room attendant entered one of the cottages and immediately felt something was off. The bed was still neatly made, the towels untouched, and Mina's bag was exactly where she'd left it. It didn't look like she had come back that night. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe the guest stayed somewhere else. But as the hours passed, that feeling didn't go away. The guest was Mina Kim, 27, visiting from Seoul, South Korea. She worked as a marketing assistant for a beauty company, and this trip had been something she'd planned for months, especially after a recent breakup. According to a friend, she just wanted time to herself. A quiet break, away from everything. When the room attendant reported in at the reception about the situation, they learned that Mina hadn't checked out. Her key hadn't been returned. They tried calling her phone, and it rang once, then went dead. And that's when the resort staff started asking around. I understand the resort's response. It follows standard procedure for a missing guest. And despite what people think, you don't actually have to wait 24 hours to report someone missing. The bartender was the first to recall something clearly. He had seen Mina the night before at the bar, sitting with two other travelers, relaxed, laughing, just enjoying the night. It was a small resort, quiet enough that people noticed each other without trying. When the bar closed, most guests headed back to their rooms, but Mina didn't. A staff member later remembered seeing her near a service side area, still playing music from a small speaker. He went over to ask her to lower it. At first, it looked like a normal interaction, but it didn't end there. He stayed and started asking questions, where she was from, how long she was staying. Then it got more personal. At some point, he asked for her number, and she turned him down. One guest said it just seemed like a staff member lingering a little too long. No raised voices, no clear tension, just a slightly awkward moment. Another remembered Mina shaking her head before turning back to her conversation, and that was it. The next time she was seen was the following day. A guest remembered spotting Mina walking alone toward a narrow trail behind the resort. It led away from the main beach to a quieter stretch of shoreline. It wasn't restricted, but it also wasn't where people usually went. After that, no one saw her again. At first, they didn't think much of it because guests sometimes miss checkouts, but then someone found her sandals near a service path behind the resort, an area guests don't usually go. And for me, that piece of information will actually be very important because it's not normal and it implies something. Staff reported her missing, and police were called. They started retracing her last known movements, time at the bar, the path she took, and the last confirmed sighting. From there, the search moved beyond guest areas into the maintenance side of the property. That's where they found her. She was lying in a shallow area partially covered by brush, just past the service zone. By the time they reached her, it was already too late. At first, there were questions. Maybe it was an accident. But her position didn't look like a fall, and nothing around her explained what happened. Then, small details started to stand out. A bracelet was found along the path, stretched like it had been pulled. Then they checked the CCTV. A camera near a supply shed picked up someone moving in the same direction Mina had taken. You couldn't see the face clearly, but it showed someone following that path shortly after her. And that changed the investigation. Investigators started looking more closely at the staff, and that's when one coworker spoke up. He remembered a worker complaining the night before about a guest who had turned him down. The same worker people had seen talking to Mina earlier and later heading toward that back trail where he wasn't supposed to be. From there, things started to line up. Investigators believe he approached her again in that area where there was no one else around. The post-mortem made it clear. Mina didn't fall, she was attacked. She died from pressure to her neck, and there were clear signs she fought back. But out there, in that isolated spot, no one was close enough to hear her. It all pointed back to the same person, the worker from that first interaction. Everything started to make sense. What people saw, the CCTV footage, even soil from the area, matched what was found on his belongings. It all pointed back to him. He was arrested, charged, and later found guilty in court. The judge sentenced him to decades in prison, meaning he'll spend most of the rest of his life behind bars. I know this case would really change how you look at paradise again, especially when you're alone. But in the next case, it's the opposite. Leon was surrounded by people, and somehow that still doesn't make him safe. A small aircraft stays stable only if its weight is balanced. Passengers, cargo, and even movement all have to stay within limits. If that balance shifts too far, the aircraft stops responding properly. The nose dips, controls get heavier, and at low altitude there's almost no time to recover. Once that limit is crossed, control is lost. On April 20th, 2017, a small regional aircraft was approaching Bukavu in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. The flight was short, carrying a mix of local passengers and a few foreign tourists. It wasn't unusual for planes like this to be crowded. Bags were stacked wherever there was space, sometimes loosely secured. Among them was Leon Bauer, 41, a Belgian national. This was his first time traveling abroad and his very first time flying. According to my research, Leon wasn't there for conventional adventure. He was traveling specifically for health tourism. Weeks earlier, he had been diagnosed with early-stage asthma, and his doctor had suggested a temporary change in environment to a higher altitude. Leon became fixated on the highland microclimate surrounding Bukavu, believing the mountain air would offer a therapeutic escape from the damp conditions of his home. Once airborne, everything felt stable. The engine leveled out, movement settled, and people relaxed. But even before takeoff, something had felt off. One bag in the cabin wasn't properly secured. It shifted slightly, and at one point, someone heard a faint scrape from inside. No one said anything, and this is the part that really makes me question it. Why didn't anyone speak up about it before takeoff? After takeoff, the movement stopped, and for a while, it just blended into the background. But then it moved again. It was subtle, like a small jolt, just enough for a few people nearby to notice. Then it happened a second time, stronger. The fabric shifted, the shape inside pressing outward. The zipper began to give under the pressure, slowly separating as whatever was inside pushed harder against it. Within seconds, it forced its way through. A crocodile slipped out into the cabin. There wasn't time for anyone to process what they were seeing. Passengers panicked and were trying to create distance, but there was nowhere to go. The aisle was narrow, the cabin packed, and the only open space was toward the front. So their only option is to remove the seatbelt and move to the front. Not in any organized way, obviously, but by instinct. People pushed forward to get away, and within seconds, it became a chain reaction. The weight moved forward, pushing the center of gravity past safe limits. Up front, the pilot felt it immediately. The nose dipped, controls became harder to manage, and with the plane already descending, there wasn't enough time to correct it. At that point, the aircraft was working against its own balance, and there wasn't enough altitude to recover. Corrections came too late. The descent turned unstable, then unrecoverable, and within moments, the plane went down. In the hours after, responders reached the site and searched the wreckage. A few survivors were found, and their testimonies became key to understanding what happened inside the cabin. At first, investigators looked at mechanical failure, but nothing supported that. The aircraft hadn't failed on its own. The cause came from inside, and honestly, that's what makes it worse, because it means this didn't have to happen. A crocodile had been smuggled on board in an unsecured bag. When it escaped, it triggered panic. Passengers rushed forward all at once, shifting the weight beyond what the aircraft could handle. The animal didn't bring the plane down directly. The sudden movement inside did. Leon Bauer was later identified through his belongings, including a bag that survived the crash with documents and personal notes inside. His injuries were consistent with a high-impact collision. The case was ultimately ruled an accident caused by a loss of control due to an internal weight imbalance. No one was formally prosecuted. Investigators pointed instead to systemic issues, weak cargo screening, informal loading practices, and overcrowded conditions. What gets me there is how something so small and overlooked ended up affecting everyone on that plane. And the next case feels similar, but this time it's not a hidden threat. It's just a normal reaction that goes too far. In November 2016, inside a hotel corridor in Costa Adeje, Spain, a foreign guest was found pinned beneath a vending machine late at night. And honestly, when I first read that, it didn't make sense to me either. I mean, vending machines don't just fall over. They're heavy, stable, and you see them everywhere, and nothing like that ever crosses your mind. So the real question isn't just what happened, it's how something like that even starts. The hallway was quiet that night, just the low hum of machines and dim lights left on until morning. It felt completely safe. One guest stayed at the vending machine trying to get something out. It didn't look unusual, just someone dealing with a stuck snack, so they walked away, assuming he'd sort it out. The item was caught halfway down, stuck behind the coil. Close enough to see, but not enough to reach. He presses the button again. Nothing. Tries one more time. Still nothing. So he stays there, looking through the glass, trying to figure out the easiest way to free it. He taps the front panel, then hits it a little harder when nothing happens. The machine rattles, but the snack doesn't move, so he tries shaking it. At first, it's just a small test. The machine shifts slightly, then settles back into place, and that's what changes everything. Now it feels like it might actually work. He grips the front edge and pulls it forward a little. The machine tilts, then drops back. For a moment, it looks like that's the limit, but it isn't. When he pulls again, it tilts further than before, still not enough to feel dangerous, just enough to feel like progress. From where he's standing, it still feels controlled. But the balance has already shifted. It leans forward again, and this time, it doesn't come back. However, this time, it didn't settle. It just kept moving. Investigation showed that he tried to step back, but he was already leaning forward from the pull, his footing a bit off. There just wasn't enough space to get out of the way in time. Within a second, the weight takes over. The machine comes down onto his upper body, pinning him to the floor. There's no room to move, nothing to push against, and no way to take a full breath. And just like that, the hallway goes quiet again. A few minutes later, his co-workers returned. They had gone to the reception for a change, expecting to come back and either try another machine or leave it for the night. Instead, they found him underneath it. They called for help immediately. Staff arrived quickly, but it took several people working together to lift the machine enough to free him. By then, he wasn't responding. Emergency services arrived shortly after, but there was very little they could do. His name was Tomas Ibarra. He was 27, a night stock clerk from Zaragoza on his first trip abroad with co-workers. According to his friends, Tomas wasn't reckless. If anything, he was the kind of person who handled things himself. At work, if something jammed or broke, he didn't wait for someone else to fix it. He dealt with it right away, even if it meant forcing it back into place, and it usually worked. Earlier that night, they had come back after a few drinks, not heavily intoxicated, just tired, hungry, and a little impatient. Most nearby shops were already closed, and the vending machine felt like the easiest option. When the snack got stuck, it didn't feel like a risk, just something that needed a bit more effort. The medical findings confirmed the cause of death as crush asphyxia. The weight of the machine pressed into his chest, preventing him from breathing and causing fatal internal damage within minutes. Inspectors later found that the anti-tip mechanism on the unit was outdated, and there had been prior complaints about it jamming. Nothing had been done to repair or replace it. Back in Zaragoza, the store where Thomas worked changed its policy. Employees were no longer allowed to handle faulty equipment themselves. Everything had to be reported and repaired properly. Because what happened in that hallway didn't feel dangerous at the time. It just felt like something that would work if he tried one more time. I think most of us have done that, trying to fix something ourselves instead of just walking away. But in Leon's case, that small decision ended up costing far more than it ever should have. The line didn't snap the way people expect. From the platform, it didn't look dramatic at all. 1 second, the harness carrying 2 riders was moving steadily across the valley, fast and controlled like every other run that day. Then, the shape of the cable changed. It sagged in a way it wasn't supposed to, and almost immediately, both riders dropped out of its path and disappeared below the trees. At first, no one reacted right away. It didn't register as a failure because nothing about that line had looked wrong. It had been used over and over, and every run before that had gone the same way. Earlier that day, Arvin Ramos, 35, and Leah Mantos, 28, had arrived at the attraction like any other tourists. They were there for the experience, the kind of people usually describe as the highlight of the trip. The Zipline was known for its Superman ride, where you're positioned face down and sent across a wide jungle valley at high speed. It looked intense, but controlled enough to trust, especially with staff guiding every step. On April 8, 2017, neither of them saw it as risky. They listened to the briefing, followed instructions, and went through the process like everyone else. Staff checked their harnesses and guided them into position. Everything felt routine, which made it easy to trust. When it was their turn, they were clipped in together and lowered into position beneath the cable. Their bodies were stretched out horizontally, facing forward, suspended over uneven ground far below. At the signal, they were released. Like every ride, it started with a small drop before the cable caught and pulled them forward. That drop turned into speed quickly, and within seconds, they were gliding across the valley, the wind pushing against them. From the platform, it looked completely normal, smooth, steady, nothing out of place. They were already near the middle when something shifted. At first, it was barely noticeable. The line dipped a little more than it should have, just enough to feel off. They were still moving forward, but the pull wasn't as smooth anymore, like the tension wasn't holding the same way. And when I went through the reports on this case, this was the first clear sign something wasn't right, and the moment they should have backed away. Then it dipped again, lower this time, and before there was even a chance to fully process what was happening, the tension disappeared. There was no loud snap, no sharp sound to signal that something had broken. The resistance that had been holding them in place simply gave out. One moment, they were being carried across the valley, supported by the system, and the next, nothing was holding them at all. They dropped instantly, still facing forward, still secured in the harness, but now with no cable guiding them and nothing slowing the fall. There was no time to react or adjust. By the time something felt wrong, it had already happened. They were falling to their death. From the platform, the staff saw the change almost immediately. The cable didn't hold its shape the way it should have, and the harness that had been moving along it was suddenly gone from view. Emergency response started right away, but the terrain below made everything harder. The area under the line wasn't easily accessible, and there was no direct path down. Responders had to move across uneven ground and dense vegetation to reach where they had landed, and by the time they got there, both Arvin and Leah were unresponsive. When investigators examined what had happened, the focus quickly shifted to the cable itself. From the outside, it looked completely intact. There were no visible warning signs, no fraying, no damage that would have stood out during routine checks. Based on the information available, the line had passed inspection. The problem wasn't visible on the surface. Inside, the cable's strands had already weakened from repeated use, with small fractures building over time but staying hidden, which is why earlier runs seemed normal. But this ride added more stress. In the Superman position, their weight is pulled forward as well as down, increasing tension, especially at launch and the midpoint. By the time Arvin and Leah were on the line, that section was already compromised. When they reached the center of the span, the stress exceeded what the cable could handle. It didn't fail in one clean break. Instead, the internal strands gave out one after another until there was nothing left to support the load. Once it reached that point, the failure wasn't gradual anymore. It was immediate. The report confirmed both died from the impact. There were no signs of misuse. They followed instructions like everyone else before them. Afterward, the attraction was shut down. Inspections were upgraded to detect internal damage, and stricter limits were placed on tandem rides. Because in the end, the failure wasn't visible, and what felt like a routine experience was the moment the system gave out without warning. But the next case is worse in a different way, because nothing about it looks dangerous at all. It just didn't make sense. A woman was admitted to a hospital with what looked like an ordinary infection, including fatigue, fever, and stomach discomfort. The kind of symptoms you see all the time, but something about it didn't add up. The fatigue got heavier, the fever stayed, and then new symptoms started showing up. She had trouble focusing, moments where she felt confused, and even issues with coordination. And the hardest part was that none of it followed a clear pattern. It didn't point to anything specific. She was getting worse as hours passed. That's when doctors started going back through everything where she had been, what she had eaten, and what she might have been exposed to. And pretty quickly, her trip to the Amazon became the main focus. The patient was Celia Dunn, 46, a substitute school librarian from Oregon. She had taken time off to travel alone, something she had been planning for a while. Although her family describes her as careful and the kind of person who pays attention to details, when she traveled, she allowed herself to loosen up a bit and just be in the moment. I think this is where the problem started. The moment she let her guard down just enough without realizing the risk. On July 3, 2015, Celia booked a tour in the Amazon and stayed at a small lodge along an upper Amazon tributary. The setup was simple. It had wooden walkways, open structures, and guided trips through the surrounding river system. A few days in, the group traveled upriver. It had rained recently, and the river had spread into areas it normally didn't reach. Side channels had formed a shallow, darker, and almost still compared to the main flow. When they stopped, guests were given the option to step into the water. Some stayed on the boat, and others stepped in, including Celia. One of the travelers hesitated for a moment. They mentioned the water felt a little off. It's too still, too warm, with insects gathering along the surface. It wasn't said like a warning, just a passing comment before they stepped back out. However, Celia stayed in, not for long, but just enough to wade in, feel the water, and take in the moment. The trip went on without any issues, and she returned home a few days later. At first, she just felt a little off, tired, had a mild fever, and some stomach discomfort. It felt like something small, the kind of thing you expect to pass after a few days. She went to see a doctor and was treated for what seemed like a routine infection, but it didn't go away. From there, they expanded testing beyond the usual causes, and slowly the results started narrowing. Eventually, they pointed to something less typical, a rare parasitic infection linked to freshwater exposure. Unfortunately, by that time, it had already progressed. Inside her body, the organism had moved beyond its entry point. The damage wasn't isolated anymore. It had spread, triggering inflammation that began affecting multiple systems, including the brain. Treatment options became limited, and her condition declined quickly after that. Despite medical intervention, the damage couldn't be reversed. Celia Dunn died in the hospital. Based on what I found, cases like this have happened before, especially infections linked to freshwater, and Celia wasn't an isolated case. And it shows the risk isn't impossible, It's rare, but it's there, and that's what makes it more dangerous. The post-mortem confirmed the cause: complications from a parasitic infection acquired through freshwater exposure. There were no external signs of injury, nothing visible that would have suggested how serious it had become. In simple terms, something microscopic had entered through contact with the river and kept moving long after that moment had passed. Looking back, I wouldn't have seen this as dangerous at all. No extreme conditions, no obvious risk, just stepping into the water during a guided trip. It was supposed to be a simple family trip, the kind you plan for years, not because it's extravagant, but because it takes time to finally make it happen. Reza Malik was 39, a photocopier repair technician from Bandung. His wife Nisa, 36, sold homemade snacks to neighbors to help cover daily expenses. Traveling wasn't something they did often. Most of their money went to rent, school fees, and everything in between. This trip was different. They had put it off for years, and when they finally booked it, it wasn't about luxury. It was about a promise to their children, Hana, 9, and Yusuf, 6, who had never seen the ocean at night. When they arrived at a coastal resort near Anak Krakatau, everything felt exactly as they'd imagined: open beach, steady water, and the volcano sitting quietly in the distance, more like part of the view than a threat. Other guests described it as a normal evening. People walked along the shore, took photos, and relaxed. There were brief mentions of volcanic activity during check-in, but nothing urgent, so no one thought much of it, and everything continued as usual. On the evening of December 22nd, 2018, the Malik family stayed by the beach. Hana and Yusuf moved along the shoreline, picking up shells and showing each other what they found. Nisa followed them with her phone, recording small moments, while Reza stayed close, watching, stepping in now and then whenever Yusuf wandered a little too far toward the water. It was calm and quiet. The kind of night where everything feels settled, where nothing really stands out as a concern. But at some point, a low rumble carried across the water. It was this faint, uneven sound out in the distance, the kind you'd probably just brush off as thunder or maybe the weather shifting. No one really reacted to it. It didn't feel close, it didn't feel urgent, and it just blended into the background like everything else that night. However, not long after that, the shoreline started to change a little. The water pulled back just enough to show more sand than before. Nothing dramatic, it just looks like the tide is doing its thing. A few people noticed, but no one seemed concerned. And to be fair, at that moment, there wasn't any clear reason to be. And I get it. If you're not familiar with how the ocean behaves, nothing about that moment would feel urgent. It just looks like the water is moving the way it always does. For a brief moment, everything stayed that way. Then the water began to return. At first, it looked normal. But as it moved closer, it became clear something was different. It was coming in faster than expected, with a kind of weight behind it that didn't match the usual rhythm of the shoreline. People near the water began stepping back, unsure what they were seeing. Some turned toward the resort. Others hesitated, trying to make sense of it. By the time voices were raised, the water was already moving across the sand. And this is the part that's hard to imagine when you realize what you're looking at isn't normal and there's almost no time to react. Reza pulled Yusuf close, while Nisa grabbed Hana and a small bag with their documents and phone. They moved quickly, but there was no time, and the water was moving faster than it seemed. When it reached them, it didn't just cover the ground, it pushed through with force, carrying whatever was in its path. Chairs, tables, and loose structures were swept along with it, turning the beachfront into moving debris. Visibility dropped as water and objects moved through the area, and people were pulled in different directions. In the confusion, the Malik family was separated. When the water receded, the resort was unrecognizable, debris everywhere, the shoreline difficult to navigate. Search efforts began right away, and by the next day, all four were found in different areas along the property and coast. Investigators later confirmed the cause: A tsunami triggered by a partial collapse of Anak Krakatau, which sent a fast-moving surge toward shore with almost no warning. Their identities were confirmed and returned to Bandung. Officials concluded that once the wave reached the resort, escape would have been extremely difficult. In the months after, coastal safety protocols were updated to account for volcanic-related risks. But for the people on that beach that night, none of that existed yet. Because nothing about that moment felt dangerous. It just felt like the ocean, changing for a second longer than expected.